The first thing your suggestion did about retelling, if you like, Vivaldi's words in between the movements of the seasons, it made me look again, listen again to this extraordinary piece of music, but listen to it properly, as he would have liked me to. And as I listened to it, to let my mind wander into spring and into summer and autumn and winter. I'm very lucky in the sense that it suits me. I live in the middle of the countryside. I'm very season conscious, as most country people are. We are at the mercy, at the behest really of the seasons. I live on a farm, everything to do with the cycle of birth, whether it's of a seed in the ground or of a calf or a lamb, happens all around me. So the rhythm of the seasons is not just poetic to me. It means something deep to me when the flowers appear and when the leaves bud, and indeed when they fall off and you're scuffling through leaves. I'm conscious of that because I live in it, which is one of the reasons, I suppose, because I grew up a little bit in the countryside. Not always. I was also urban and suburban. But I'm conscious of the fact these days that an awful lot of people don't experience season, or if they do, it's less. And actually seasons can be a nuisance. It's too wet, it's too windy, it's too cold. Leaves on the railway lines, you know what I mean? No one really talks about the trees and the leaves. They talk about the inconvenience if your train not running or whatever. So the seasons have become sometimes, and we like it in the summer, but not too hot. That's really important. Mm-hmm. And it must go on day after day after day. Yeah. But then it's a bore because we haven't got enough water. And we lose a sense of the seasons being part of nature and not part of a convenient landscape for us to get used to in our lives. So your invitation to write these little poems in between the seasons was one of those moments you just sat down and I wrote it because it's all in the head. I didn't really have to. I had to listen to the music again and again and again to read his words to make sure I was retelling, and I like retelling. Mm-hmm. And I'm conscious of the fact that most of the books that people read and the stories that people tell are retellings. What they say, there's 7 stories ever written in the world, and everything is a retelling of those. And I've just done, for instance, a retelling of Shakespeare. And starting off, I thought, well, this is all right. That's what he did. All his plays are retellings. He never invented anything, silly man. Well, of course, it's nonsense. He took a story and grew it in his own way, which is what we all do. And you asked me to grow what Vivaldi had written down. And it was a joy, a sheer joy, because it was all around me.
So one of the things I love most about what you've said is that when you talk about how we live with nature and the seasons, it immediately called to mind one of the things that I think about most with classical music. And by classical, I mean Western classical structure. So in this case, from the Baroque era, of course, is that we are very content with acknowledging the aesthetics of something. In this case, acknowledging the seasons as existing, but much less so with acknowledging the practical reality of what those are.
Yeah.
And understanding that things have their shape and form and that we live within it and with it. And when the score is presented to me for the music, and one of the reasons I was so insistent that we would make this recording together was because I know this piece on a symbolic level, on a deeper level, and what I really wanted to do was engage with it practically, like Vivaldi had just written it for me, for Manchester Camerata, and to be honest, alongside you, perhaps, had written it and shown you the score with pride. And what that really means, not in a narrative sort of pretty picture sense of collaboration and the romanticism that this can involve, but actually what it means for the dedication and devotion to the score. And I'm going to come back to your words in a moment, but we think about spring. Shall we start at the beginning, at least of these 4 concertos: spring, summer, autumn, winter. I'm immediately struck by how much Vivaldi's music it's not that it even invites us into spring and into growth and greenery and dew. It doesn't invite you anywhere. You are suddenly there. I look at the score and I can feel things beginning to grow, reviving.
Mm.
I can hear some leaves that have made it, and I can hear a branch that unfortunately belongs to the winter past and will never come back. I can hear hope, but not human hope. The hope that the growth of nature
Yeah.
it sort of seems to exhibit. In the second movement, he's painted this picture of the dog barking and the shepherd sleeping. And it's so clear in the music and in your own poetry, in the way you've, as I've said, as the way we acknowledge the reality of the season, the text and the music. We go to the third movement, which is this, maybe the most human in a sense of these three movements in spring, but of the dance that signifies joy. In my head, the closest you could say in music would be The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, which is sonically a world away, and yet the fervor and the ritualistic devotion to what is really happening in nature around us is clear. That sort of the low drone and hum of the bagpipe that Vivaldi clearly hid within his score is there. And I remember really needing for you to be Vivaldi's modern equivalent for this reason, because I find that you have a way of capturing a feeling that we all always have, but don't necessarily acknowledge that we have.
Yeah.
An awareness of what really is.
Yeah.
And that's in this score. And this piece for me is not the frivolous undertaking that it can sometimes seem when we listen to it or when it's played. It's a deep devotion to reality, I think.
Yeah, it can, and it's interesting because I've heard it and seen it quite often played in Venice, where we go to quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And there it's kind of showy. It's part of Venice tourism, which I don't think Vivaldi would have liked very much, because it's played at, I think, quite a superficial level. That's it. You've done your 4 seasons, off you go. It never touches you. You never really think of spring or summer or autumn or winter. It's just there in that wonderful place. You come out thinking, well, Vivaldi walked these streets, and that's very important in my life. For me, one of the joys of being asked to do this is also because in another part of my life, which is the part that deals with education and children, both my own, but particularly other children who I've been teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I focus my teaching life on, my wife has 2, Claire, on introducing young people to the seasons, to nature. So we began this charity, Farms for City Children, 50 years ago, and 100,000 children ago now. And they come out to these farms and they live and they work on the land. And what they do is they help with the farmer. So they witness birth and death. They dig the potatoes. They pick the blackberries. They pick up the eggs. They are connected to the seasons, probably for the first time in their lives. And most children in cities where these kids come from, the seasons are to do with the weather, just the weather. It's wet, get your coat on type thing. And playtime is inside, boring. It's not to do with the rhythm of how the world is. It's not their fault. They've been cut off from the rhythm of nature. And my sort of whole notion, and I think it's not me, it's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, is that that's where people belong. They belong to the world about them. And if children don't care about it, then why the heck should they look after it? This has to be something that's deep, deep inside them. And what this amazing music does, and indeed what his words is, make us think about that artistically, creatively. And I think for me, I mean, obviously I'm looking forward to being able to perform this in front of an audience, but I want children there. I want children to hear this and to understand how profound their connection is to the people as well as to the place. Thomas Hardy once talked about the old association, which is living in a place and knowing who planted that tree, who plows that field. Is that person still living? Is his granddad in the graveyard? A sense of belonging. And that's so, so important. Now, unless you live in the countryside, it can't be that close. But we mustn't let the way we live, which is intensely urban, cut us off. And this music is like Vivaldi reaching out to us and not just bringing it back to his time in the 18th century. It's not. This is the same world, you know. He talks in his music and in his words about the world around us, of birds, of flowers. We live with these birds and these flowers. We destroyed many of them, which is another issue which is important. And to hear this, you are refreshed. It's that business of music refreshing you. And I hope the words help that. I'm also fascinated, as you know, because we worked on this before, on putting words and music, not singing words, so that's pretty good. It's called opera or whatever. No, just words and music together and telling the story of the seasons. Well, Vivaldi did it for his own purposes. Most people don't know that happened at all. They just listen to the music. I found the words enormously helpful in comprehending what the heck was going on in this extraordinary man's head. So for me, it's one of the great high spots of my life, to be as deeply engaged with him, and indeed again with the seasons. But it's something I want to pass on to the children. I want the children to hear this. Above all, the children should hear it. And not as a lesson. It's not a lesson. No. It helps to reconnect. That's all it is.
When we talk about nature and these things that are perhaps not to do with the whims and superficiality of some of our more human thoughts, it is nevertheless deeply human, because of course we are part of nature and we are deeply part of the system. And I, again, back to the score, I think, say, speaking about summer, for example, the yawning implied in the opening, the sheer fatigue from tiredness, from that type of heat that only exists at a certain type of time of the year. The heat that sort of sits like a physical object is prevalent in the score. We hear it from the first bar to the last of the first movement. And it was my absolute mission to see if we could, rather than create pretty pictures, which are fine in and of themselves, but to make the listener, starting with ourselves, the musicians playing it, and you, the writer, if we could really embody that in our understanding of the music we're playing, how when the cuckoo sings, it is not the idea of a cuckoo, it is the cuckoo, the reality of what this aggressive and odd bird is.
Thoroughly unpleasant bird in all sorts of
ways. I gather.
Really wonderfully unpleasant, and in a way the whole story of a cuckoo. Yeah. Young people, it's very important they know the stories of these. They hear it, maybe if they're lucky, they hear it. But to hear a bird that's flown all that way, to actually, in a very sophisticated way, murder other people's children, and so you can lay your egg in the nest. And I mean, it's just the whole thing is unspeakably cruel, but they make such a beautiful noise, and it's very interesting for people to know this is tooth and claw nature. This is what goes on, and we have in this piece we have a hunting scene, which is pretty unpopular these days, but it's really interesting because that's how it's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. But what does it do? It's not a finger pointing at people. What it is, it tells you how the countryside has been used in the past and is to a certain extent thought of by people. And all of us have our own take on the countryside. This is where the music takes you. It takes you out to the countryside again. You feel the cold in winter. You really feel the cold. And then when you see what he writes, you know, you're supposed to feel the cold in your...
But then would you agree with me that it's not enough to simply, for want of a better way of putting it, play the notes in summer? Say, we all know the storm in the third movement, but a storm is this extraordinary sort of meeting of forces. It's a thing that changes lives in good and bad ways. And I hope you will agree that while the music Vivaldi wrote paints this extraordinary picture, it's not enough, because the onus is on the human beings who deliver it then to really, really take to heart what it is Vivaldi is asking us to be aware of. This is what I hear most in the way you speak about nature and the way I think about music, and what we've tried to do with this recording and this project is to not just bring other awareness to other people, but to show how aware we are of what it is we are handling and holding and talk about.
I think what's wonderful also about music in particular, if I can talk about something I know nothing about, which is music, it's a universal language, and it speaks to us in a way. Words can interfere. They can tell you what to think. They can imply things all the time. And the wonderful thing about music is that it leaves so much to the listener. It's very enlightening from that point of view, and in a way that, I mean, I wish, to be honest, I'd been a composer. There's a real problem that bookish people have is that they talk about it all the time. I find it's much more important, if you can, it's simply to read the words, tell the story, tell the poem. And with music, it's the same. I think when you come out of this marvelous recording, which you've been making, and which I hope I've contributed a little to, what's lovely is someone will walk off after the concert, and that'll be in their head forever, without you or me saying anything. It's the memory of something which recasts the way you look at the world a bit, which enriches you. And music does this like nothing else.
We have this extraordinary postcard, in a way, or picture of real life, of people with sleeves rolled up, of people who are either grateful for what has happened in nature or lament what's happened that year, and who are the recipients of bounty or the worst possible outcome.
I think just as important to me, in a way, now I've reached the age of 80, is that I think of all the music I know, this is a portrait of life, not just the seasons, of youth and middle age, and then finally old age. And I find the rhythm of that, and maybe you have to have lived it to have understood that the music is certainly a part of that. It's annoying, actually, when you really discover that Shakespeare, I think, was 42 when he wrote King Lear. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck did he know about old age? Well, he did, and Vivaldi knew, because he was an extraordinarily wise man, I think, an interesting man. He knew about how it was to grow old. He knew about the whole business, the whole what you have to go through, because he'd witnessed it, sensed it. And I feel we're being taken through life as well, our own lives. I think it's one of the reasons the music is so appealing to us, because you do go through the seasons of life with Vivaldi, and he takes you by the hand, the music, and that's just, it's a wonderful gift he's given us.
And you're guided all the way to death, in a sense. That winter, for me, is death from beginning to end. Death that.
But the good thing about it is that it goes back to spring again. So even when you're 80 and you're thinking, actually, you've had your best days, and actually life goes on. How do you know that? Because of children and because of grandchildren. And it's this whole rhythm of life which you have to come to accept. And he really, he does enlighten us about how we think of ourselves at a certain age, and how we think of the young. And it, I don't know, I find it so wonderful to listen to live through youth again, to live through middle age, and then actually old age it's not terrifying, it's a bit calming, it's a bit sad, and but spring is round the corner.